Hello, everyone. Think about this for a moment. When people feel stressed before an exam, why do they sometimes get sick afterwards? And when we have the flu, why do we feel tired and mentally slow? What's happening here is actually communication between the nervous system and the immune system. For a long time, scientists believed these systems worked separately. But now we know they communicate through nerves, hormones, and immune signals. Today, I'll be talking about the hidden conversation between the nervous and immune systems. I'll briefly discuss how this communication works, where it happens, and the major research gaps that still remain. Let's first look at how this neuroimmune communication works. So the nervous and immune systems are constantly interacting, and this communication is happening all the time, not just during infection. The nervous system senses changes in the body, while the immune system monitors injury, pathogen, and inflammation. And both systems continuously exchange information. An important point here is that this communication goes both directions. The brain and nerves can regulate immune activity, but immune cells can also signal back to the nervous system. So, this is not a one direction pathway, it is an integrated network. The communication occurs by signaling molecules. The nervous system uses neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and acetylcholine. In contrast, the immune system uses cytokines and chemokines. And as you can see in this diagram, neurons and immune cells are constantly exchanging these signaling molecules in both directions. Interestingly, immune cells can respond directly to neural signals. So, overall, these interactions help maintain homeostasis in the body. They regulate inflammation, infection responses, tissue repair, and even behavior. When this balance is disrupted, many diseases can develop. So, now that we understand the basic idea of neuroimmune communication, let's look at where exactly these interactions happen in the body. One major focus here is the spatial organization of neuroimmune communication. In simple words, where these interactions happen in the body. And interestingly, neuroimmune signaling occurs across many different tissues and organs. As you can see in this figure, these interactions occur throughout the body, including the brain, gut, lungs, skin, spleen, and lymph nodes. For example, important communication sites include the brain, gut, skin, and lungs. In the gut, neurons interact with the immune cells to regulate inflammation and microbial responses. And in the skin and lungs, sensory neurons help detect allergens, pathogens, and tissue injury. Another important point is that immune organs themselves receive nerve connections. Organs like the spleen, lymph nodes, and the bone marrow are directly influenced by autonomic nerves. So the nervous system can regulate immune cell activity very closely. And another important concept is neuroimmune cell units. These are small local environments where neurons and immune cells interact directly. The units help coordinate rapid responses during infection, inflammation, or tissue damage. So we talked about where these interactions happen. But another important question is when, at which stages immune cells are influenced. One of the most interesting ideas here is the temporal framework of neuroimmune communication. This means the nervous system can influence immune cells across different stages of their life cycle. And as you can see in this timeline diagram, these neural influences can occur during immune cell development, movement, activation, and even memory formation. The nervous system also influences where immune cells move inside the body. Stress signals and autonomic signaling can change immune cell trafficking between tissues and blood circulation. So, neural activity can actually redistribute immune cells. Now, during infection or inflammation, neural pathways can regulate how strongly immune cells become activated. This helps prevent excessive inflammation that could damage tissues. So the nervous system helps fine-tune immune responses. And interestingly, neuroimmune communication may also affect immune memory. This area is still being studied, but researchers think neural signals could influence long-term immune responses after infection or vaccination. So now that we have looked at the spatial and temporal organization, let's move to the actual communication pathways involved. One major pathway is the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic nerves release neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, which directly affect immune cells in tissues and lymphoid organs. The vagus nerve is another pathway. It works almost like an inflammatory reflex system. It senses inflammation and helps suppress excessive immune responses through neural signaling. Another pathway is the HPA axis. During stress, the brain triggers hormone release, which eventually increases cortisol levels. And cortisol has a strong effect on immune activity and inflammation. Communication also goes from the immune system back to the nervous system. Cytokines released during infection can affect brain function and behavior. And as you can see in this diagram, all these pathways are connected in a communication system between the brain and the immune organs. That's why sickness often causes fatigue, fever, reduced appetite, and sleep changes. So these pathways are extremely important for normal physiology, but when communication becomes dysregulated, disease can develop. When neuroimmune communication becomes abnormal, it can contribute to many diseases. For example, autoimmune diseases, chronic inflammatory disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases. Long-term inflammation can strongly affect the nervous system. It may contribute to depression, cognitive decline, and diseases like Parkinson's disease. Another important aspect is sensory neuroimmune interactions. Sensory neurons interact with immune cells in tissues like skin and mucosal surfaces. These interactions are important in pain, itch, allergies, and inflammatory diseases. And because these pathways are so important, scientists are now exploring new therapies. For example, vagus nerve stimulation, anti inflammatory approaches, and targeted neuroimmune treatments. And as you can see in this diagram, these neuroimmune pathways are now being explored both in disease mechanisms and as potential therapeutic targets. So, even though we now understand much more about these interactions, there are still several major unanswered questions. One major research gap is that the full neuroimmune communication network is still not completely understood. There are many signaling molecules, cell types, and pathways interacting simultaneously. Another challenge is translating findings from animal studies into humans. Most detailed work is still done in mice, but human neuroimmune systems are much more complex. We still do not fully understand the long term effects. For example, how chronic inflammation or chronic stress changes neural and immune function over many years. And finally, future therapies need to become more targeted. Right now, many therapies suppress the immune activity broadly, but researchers are working on precision approaches that regulate specific pathways without strong side effects. If you would like to explore further, please read the cited article. Thank you for listening.